Nigeria's output declined further in October, losing the top spot to Libya amid persisting supply disruptions. Now, this is according to the latest monthly oil market report released by the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC. The report says that Nigeria's production declined sharply to 1.35 million barrels per day by 45,000 barrels in October. Well, the drop was the highest decline in production recorded by the cartel from its members in October, according to secondary sources. Libya, which overtook Angola as Africa's second highest oil producer in December, recorded an increase of 15,000 barrels per day to 1.16 million barrels per day in October. OPEC said oil output climbed in Saudi Arabia, Venezuela, the UAE, while Kuwait, Gabon and Equatorial Guinea suffered a decline in its monthly oil production.
Well, the Food and Agricultural Organization says the global food trade is poised to hit an all-time record in both volume and value terms in 2021. In its latest food outlook, FAO predicts that the global food import bill could reach an all-time high in 2021 and surpass $1.75 trillion, marking a 14% increase from 2020 and 12% higher than the earlier forecast in June 2021. The report notes that the global food trade has shown remarkable resilience to disruptions throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. But it says that the way prices of food commodities and energy are rising, it will pose significant challenges for poorer countries and consumers who spend large shares of their incomes on necessities.
Well, for more on these stories, we're joined from our Lagos studio by economist and senior partner at SPM Professionals, Paul Alaje. Paul, it's always a delight to have you on the show. Now, what factors really are responsible for this, Nigeria's lowering oil output? I mean, Libya, with all the crisis in that country, is able to overtake Angola and Nigeria. What is Libya doing right and what is Nigeria doing not so right?
Well, quite a number of things could be responsible for continuous deterioration in Nigeria oil output. Recall that this is a further deterioration or reduction because we've experienced something similar to this in the month before the month that was reported. It only showed that Nigeria oil output had continued to decrease according to OPEC. Oil field naturally deteriorates because it is a natural factor, and if we don't improve investment in oil, we will not have the kind of output that we are expecting. What Libya is doing is finding more investment and more oil fields are being opened. Nigeria had opportunity of having 3 new deep sea investments in upstream sector, which include the Southwest Arepo and 2 other ones that will be managed by Shell, Total, and ExxonMobil. But the takeoff time for these oil field has been extended. One to 2025 by by Total, 2027 by Shell, and lastly 2029 by ExxonMobil. All of these is denial of 2 billion revenue that should go into Nigerian federal government, which of course we have implication in our foreign reserve, and additional 300,000. 300,000, compare that with 15,000 that Libya gained upon production. Nigeria would have added additional 3,000 production per day to oil output. While we should not rely solely on oil, we can do other things, but oil is critical for us today because it is responsible for 90% of government foreign exchange. So if you want to see relatively stable Naira, we just need to simulate what is giving us foreign exchange today. And I think oil at the moment is answering that question.
All right, Paul, let me talk to you about food. I mean, the outlook of the FAO. What is the significance of FAO's latest outlook on global food trade? What's responsible for this, especially coming out gradually from the pandemic, and how does this rub off on African countries with particular reference to Nigeria?
Okay, so around the world, there's been economic challenge, no thanks to COVID. Developing countries are finding it very difficult. Most countries' currency are getting deteriorated. Nigeria without exemption. Before COVID, exchange rate was about 360 to 365. Today, on Central Bank's website, is about 410, 411 to $1 at the parallel market. Thankfully, is decreasing, still above 500 naira. So production continues to decrease because of weak infrastructure. In fact, what I want many Nigeria to look at is the trade report on countries. What United States Trade Ministry wrote about Africa, particularly Nigeria, on country commercials. It reported that Nigeria relied on importation of over 10 billion US dollars. And he mentioned the reasons why Nigeria may keep relying on import. One, because of banditry. Two, because of weak infrastructure. Three, and this is also applicable to some other African countries, because of weak policy. He has appreciated government effort, including Anchor Borrowers Program and all other programs that governments have put in place. Unfortunately, the fundamental in Nigeria and some other developing countries are very weak, and which are things we need to do something about. Insecurity don't allow people. Logistics, Minister of Finance has also alluded to the fact that we have issues around logistics. So as we are building railway and we're trying to build infrastructure, I think we also need to pay critical attention to connecting farmers to the market so that we can have reduced cost of production. In some cases where food are produced, some of those what is not even enough is also to a large extent wasted. And if you look at what we imported, according to the report shared, and I mean, the United States sources of such information include, one of them is the organization that published this report, the Central Bank of Nigeria. Quite a number of other institutions of government, including customs, have shown that Nigeria is not even producing to export food. So orientation is to consume. Meanwhile, the growth rate of food output for these countries is very slow compared to what, population growth rate is. So food output growth rate is slow, in some cases declining, while population growth rate continue to increase. Because there is gap and people must consume to remain alive, particularly critical products such as food, they have to import it. And that is why you continue to see import. Unfortunately, for developing countries whose currency continue to deteriorate, for instance, Nigeria, we have to now spend more to consume. That has implication on our living standard because it's going to reduce. It has implication on our cost of living because it's going to increase. Minimum wage of 30,000 naira that could buy 2 bags of rice when it was passed to law today is managing to buy a bag of rice. And how long can that take a family of 4 children, 1 wife, and a husband?
Very good question. Very quick one in 60 seconds if you can. Well, the Vice President Osinbajo actually says Nigeria is now earning more from non-oil, revenues. And is Nigeria finally on track? Is that something good that we can be optimistic about?
Well, our non-oil sector is over 90% of our GDP. Oil sector is less than 10%, but there is a lopsidedness because when you say Nigeria earn more from oil and oil is well, then you have a lot to deal with. Then you wonder why we still have high inflation, high unemployment. According to National Bureau of Statistics, over 33%, youth unemployment over 50%. But that is not even the case. Labor force reduced significantly for over 80 million, according to the National Bureau of Statistics, to less than 70 million people out of a population of over 200 million people. Non-oil sector is important, is critical, but cannot thrive without infrastructure. We may see fluke in growth in all of this and see some revenue, but definitely not what government is earning. If anything happens to crude oil, then that will be a good time to test the impact and the efficacy of non-oil sector. And I'm sure that my prayer, as well as the prayer of Mr. President and Mr. Vice President, is that oil prices should keep going up above $80 per barrel. If not, another recession may just be at the corner awaiting our country.
Your prayer is our prayer. Thank you so much, Paul Alaje, the economist and senior partner at SBM Professionals.